und bleibt der beste Sorger, er hält am besten Haus. Er führet unser Ton zuweilen wunderlich, jeden noch fröhlich aus, wohin der Vorsatz nicht gedacht, was die Vernunften möglich macht. Das füget sich, er hat das Glück der Kinder, die ihn lieben, von Jugend an, in seine Hand geschrieben.
good afternoon once again. There are two kinds of pieces by J.S. Bach connected with weddings. One kind is for secular celebrations. For example, the cantata O Holder Tag of unsre Zeit, BWV 210, known pretty much universally as the wedding cantata. That's for the event known as Hochzeit, the secular wedding celebration. The other kind consists of cantatas for the church service of marriage. That's an event known as a Trauung. And from Bach, we have 4 of such cantatas, plus several other cantatas that aren't designated that might also be for this purpose. Today's piece is one of the certain ones, Gott ist unsre Zuversicht, BWV 197. This is a work from the mid-1730s. It's known only from Bach's autograph score. There are no surviving original performing parts. It uses familiar musical resources, familiar kinds of texts and musical settings, but it has features connected directly with the wedding liturgy in particular, and reflects the aims of that liturgy. It's concerned with matters here on earth, and not matters here on earth in comparison to heavenly life. It is not occupied with salvation or Jesus' role in it for the believer. That might take a little of the weight off for the modern interpreter and listener to this cantata. The construction of the cantata also reflects the social standing of the couple for whom it was performed. Weddings were regulated in several respects in Bach's time, starting with rules and requirements that reinforced social stratification. Weddings, with their associated costs, clothing, and celebration, were in the crosshairs of so-called sumptuary laws. Those laws dated from medieval times, and they closely regulated dress, adornment, and social behavior. In Germany, partly to restrict unchristian excesses, but also to make sure that people spent, dressed, entertained, and acted in accordance with their social station, so as not to transgress boundaries. Weddings were also effectively regulated by cost. The fees for more elaborate weddings were naturally higher, and we have records from the St. Thomas sexton in Bach's time, a man named Rost, that lays out the various costs for a so-called full bridal mass. The basic unit of currency was the thaler. There was a 2 thaler fee for the priest, 18 groschen, that was sort of 2/3 of a thaler for decorations, 16 groschen for the sexton, 12 groschen for an assistant, 8 groschen for the beadle, 2 thalers for the cantor, 2 thalers to be divided among the student musicians, 2 thalers for the organist, 2 thalers for the tower musicians, and 10 thalers for the town musicians and their assistants, for a total of more than 22 thaler altogether. There were further fees, carefully designated, if the town musicians also played at the reception, and all this cost even a little bit more if all this were moved to the home, to the house of the people getting married. To give you an idea of this amount, say in comparison to a little over 22 thaler in fees, a barber's annual salary in Leipzig is said to have been about 50 thaler. A lute would cost you 21 or 22 thaler. A harpsichord maybe 50 to 80 thaler. So that gives you an idea of what a sum of money this really was. This was the highest level of a wedding ceremony. It involved the most elaborate music, a cantata, like the one we just heard, and it was, of course, for those of the highest social standing and highest means. One could also arrange for a so-called half-bridal mass, much less elaborate music, in fact, just hymn singing, supported only by student singers and the town musicians. That would set you back about 7 thaler altogether. In fact, we have a set of 3 wedding chorales by Johann Sebastian Bach, BWV 250 through 252, which were designed for just such occasions. They could pull those off the shelf, and they had a little arrangement of the chorales you needed, the hymns you needed for a half-bridal mass. If you were rich and important, you might get a piece like today's cantata. Now, the occasion for this one, that is the identity of the particular couple for whom it was first performed, is unknown, but a work like this might have become a repertory piece for Bach. The records show that there was something like 30 full bridal masses celebrated at St. Thomas Church over Bach's tenure there, and the guess is maybe about the same number at St. Nicholas. We know about the liturgy from manuals of the time and from those sexton's notes from St. Thomas Church. The betrothal was announced 3 Sundays before the weddings, and weddings usually took place on Mondays or Tuesdays, but they could also be after services and after catechism on Sundays. So after the groom enters, the service started with organ music and then a motet. The bride then arrived, and the first half of the cantata was heard. Then the ceremony of marriage itself took place at the altar. The second half of the cantata was heard. Then there was a priestly blessing followed by a singing of the Te Deum. All of Bach's wedding cantatas can be divided in 2, or are divided in 2 to fit the liturgy, just like this piece is, with a part 1 and part 2. That division could be stark sometimes. Our cantata, Cantata 197, to me almost seems to be 2 separate pieces. The first part calls for trumpets and drums at its opening, and curiously they don't return anywhere else in the piece. That's pretty unusual for a Bach cantata. Then the second half, part 2, opens with a very different sort of movement, an aria with oboe and concerted bassoons and muted violins, as far as possible in the sound from the opening of part 1. Understanding the text and music of one of these wedding cantatas is made a lot easier by knowing a little bit more about the ceremony held between the 2 parts of the cantata. Some of this will be pretty familiar from weddings in various Christian denominations now. The officiant asks the bride and groom about their intent, and they are, do you intend? And they are expected to answer, ja, each. There's an exchange of rings and a proclamation of the marriage. And then 4 scriptural passages are read aloud, addressed to the bride and groom. First, a reading from Genesis on the creation of woman from Adam's rib and on the institution of marriage. You might know the text. God saw that it was not good that man was alone, and it ends that man and husband and wife become one flesh. Second, a reading from Paul on the relation between man and woman. Man is to love his wife just as Jesus loves his congregation. The woman is to submit, and the husband is likened to the head of the marriage, just as Jesus is the head of the church. A third reading from Genesis on the burden both on men and women after the fall in the Garden of Eden. Women are to bear children in pain and be subject to their husband as Lord. Man is to get his bread daily by the sweat of his brow. And then one more reading from Genesis on the making of humans in the image of God, the instruction to be fruitful and to multiply and to granting dominion over the earth. And then near the end, a reading of Psalm 128. I'm going to read all of it for you in English translation because it is resonant with the cantata text. Blessed are all who fear the Lord, who walk in obedience to him. You will eat the fruit of your labor. Blessings and prosperity will be yours. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. Your children will be like olive shoots around your table. Yes, this will be the blessing for the man who fears the Lord. May the Lord bless you from Zion. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life. May you live to see your children's children. Peace be upon Israel. And then finally, a quotation from Proverbs. He who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord. Then the last thing was a hands-on-head blessing of the kneeling couple by the officiant and a Te Deum. There's a particular aim here, and that aim is made clear from Martin Luther's exhortation to those contemplating marriage. And this was printed in the liturgical manual just before the readings and before the ceremony and the readings. And I wonder whether sometimes it might even have been read aloud. Youth needs to regard marriage as a serious matter, wrote Luther, as divinely ordained and not a matter of frivolity. There is an instruction to conduct this in the church. The instruction to conduct a wedding in the church proves its seriousness. The point is to receive God's blessing and the congregation's prayers. It is not a farce or a piece of heathen foolishness, eine Lächerei or a heidnische Affenspiel, wrote. Here's Luther For whoever asks for prayer and blessing from the pastor shows thereby, even if he does not say it with his mouth, what danger and need he is getting himself into, and how much he needs divine blessing and common prayer for the state, that is marriage, he is entering. Just as it is also seen every day what misfortune the devil causes in the married state, with adultery, infidelity, impurity, and all kinds of misery. Must have been fun at the parties. All of Bach's wedding cantatas reflect this broad context. There are some standard elements of these cantatas we can understand in light of it. There is lots of citation of Psalm 128. There are always references to the altar, to love, and especially to blessing. And you can see and hear those topics here in our cantata. The desire for divine blessing, both parts open with reference to blessing, the verb segnen. The concluding chorale cites Segen, and it also cites Zuversicht, help and refuge, and our hope, just like the opening movement. Compare Psalm 128, blessed are all who fear the Lord, may the Lord bless you from Zion. This line is quoted in movement 6 and at the start of part 2, just after it's been read aloud. God's path and being led along it by God comes up all the time in this cantata. The verb führen in movements 1, 2, and 4. The image of a Leitstern, a guiding star in movement 3, and the path, the life's path, the Lebenslauf in movement 9. And movement 10 opens Sing, bet und geh auf Gottes Wegen. Sing, pray, and go upon God's way. Compare in Psalm 128, blessed are all those who fear the Lord and walk in obedience to them. This would have been heard in direct relation. Might make a note about that final chorale text, number 10, that I just quoted. This movement has no text in the autograph score, and as I mentioned, there are no surviving parts. So we have to take a guess about the text of this movement, and the text, as printed in pretty much every modern edition of this cantata, is actually a text that's found only in later sources. It includes the lines, so walk happily on God's paths, and what you do, do that faithfully. Earn your God's blessing, for it is new every morning. Earn your God's blessing, for it is new every morning. If you have a Lutheran doctrinal radar, it should be going off at this point to tell you that that's an impossible thought. Blessing and certainly salvation are not earned. They are, in Lutheran belief, a divine gift through grace and mercy. This could not have been the early 18th century of this text, of this chorale period. So we are using a text that we're pretty sure is far more likely for this context. What else is in this cantata? Well, of course, you will have heard there's a reference to the altar as the site of this union in movement 4. Lots of references to love, especially to divine love, particularly in movement 5. It reinforces multiple metaphors of Jesus' relationship to the church and the congregation. And then the idea of fortune and prosperity, pretty much the entire second half of the cantata is about that, reminding us of the words of Psalm 128, you will eat the fruit of your labor, blessings and prosperity will be yours. So overall, this text is thematically pretty clear. But the cantata text doesn't really have a theological through line, a progression of ideas toward a kind of theological resolution, as is the case, I think, in so many of the weekly church cantatas we've discussed in here. What is a composer to do with a text like this? Well, to some extent, Bach treats this as two separate pieces, the parts before and after the ceremony, movements 1 through 5, movements 6 through 10. Part 1 has this splashy opening with trumpets and drums and with chorus to set a celebratory tone and with an opulence in keeping with a full bridal mass and its cost. Note, as we said, that those instruments don't return. Maybe they went home after that opening movement is designed for maximum effect from a very small amount of musical material. It's a so-called aria tutti. It's just an aria sung by all four voices together, and it's got a typical aria organization, A, B, A, a da capo aria. It treats the two parts of the text. The A section, the opening section, the one that comes back, it has an instrumental ritornello that opens and closes it. with one vocal period, one statement by the voices in between. The voices start out largely on their own. They are imitative of each other with just simple harmonic support in the strings. You will then hear that they are more or less seamlessly joined by the instruments in what turns out to be the final ritornello. So the structure of the A section is instrumental ritornello, vocal section, closing ritornello. That's pretty standard for a short da capo aria. But this return of the closing ritornello isn't just played, it is sung and played. Bach writes vocal lines that fit with the instrumental material. He builds this in. And this is a common strategy in Bach's choral arias. The final ritornello balancing the opening one is not simply played, but played and sung. It allows the end of the A section, which of course will be the end of the movement when it comes back, to finish with all the voices and all the instruments in the strongest possible way. In the B section, the voices once again move mostly as one. They have two statements of the B section text with the instrumental ritornello in between. This section is designed to be musically contrasting, especially harmonically contrasting. There's almost no role for trumpets and drums in this section. That's a matter both of the desired contrast and of the fact that Bach is composing in keys that the trumpets and drums pretty much can't play in. There's a concluding simple chorale that creates a four-part tutti frame, or at least tutti less the trumpets and drums. Closing this part of the cantata with a simple chorale means that the music that precedes the ceremony, which is what comes next, is going to be the same kind of piece, whether it's an elaborate concerted movement with all the voices and instruments, or it's just a simple hymn, as you would have in, say, a half-choral mass. So that moment of transition is the same. There are two recitative texts, movements 2 and 4. One is a simple recitative just with continuo, and one uses strings. In all these recitatives offer the praise of God and exhortations to the couple. They are assigned to the same voice, to bass. Maybe Bach's feeling is that's the voice range for exhortations belonging. I don't really know. There's one aria in the middle, on a sleep topic with a lyrical oboe tune, strings used consistently in their low range, and many paired notes, and these were conventions of sleep pieces. This sleep piece, of course, has an affective change halfway through, and that affective change depends a little bit on a pun of sorts. The verb, it begins with einschlafen, means to put to sleep all those pairs. Wachen means both to watch over, which is the sense in which I think it's used, and also to wake. So you have a sleep-wake contrast, almost, right? Bach decides to go with that, even though he's punning on the word wake. Part 2 of the cantata actually has the same structure as the first, aria, recitative, chorale. Two recits, one simple and then one with instruments, just like part 1, this time with both strings and oboes leading into a final chorale. Instead of two bass recitatives, just one is for bass, the one just before the last chorale. The other is combined with an aria to make a soprano range recitative aria pair, like from a cantata, on the topic of prosperity and fortune. Just like part 1, part 2 opens with a distinctive sound world. Here, oboe, obligato bassoon, and muted violins. Just like last month's cantata, the bassoon plays only in this movement. We don't have the original parts to be certain of that, but it seems pretty likely that it's brought in here for a distinctive color and for an obligato role. Equally striking, I would say, is the instrumentation in that soprano aria number 8, solo violin, voice, and basso continuo, plus harmonic and rhythmic filler from the two oboe d'amore. One brief passage, though, where they join the concerted texture, but it's a very unusual sound. I can't think of any other Bach movement orchestrated that way. So overall, this cantata offers splashes of color in its arias, in the opening aria tutti, in solo arias for 3 different voices with 3 distinctive instrumentations, punctuating recitatives of praise and exhortation to the couple, with chorales with clearly liturgical function to end each part. Maybe just a little bit easier on the listener than the typical weekly gospel cantata, both in Bach's time and for us now. Thank you.
Vernunften möglich macht, das weget sich. Hat das Glück der Kinder, die ihn lieben, von